Ryan was 26 years old and he had been photographing abandoned buildings for 3 years. He was good at it, patient, careful, respectful in the way that serious urban explorers are, never taking anything, never damaging anything, moving through spaces the way a ghost moves, leaving no trace. Old factories in Ohio, a shuttered asylum in upstate New York, 3 locked churches in rural Tennessee that had simply closed one Sunday and never opened again. He thought he had seen everything these places had to offer. He had not been to the house in Harlan County yet. A contact sent him the coordinates. The way most good locations traveled, quietly, person to person, before they got posted anywhere public and ruined. A family home, empty since the mid-90s. No trespassing signs on a fence that had already collapsed. 2 stories mostly intact, and one more detail, mentioned almost as an afterthought. Photographs, the contact said, everywhere. Ryan didn't understand what that meant until he pushed open the front door. The house smelled the way old houses smell. Dust, damp, something faintly sweet underneath that he never traced to a source. The entry hall sat dark, windows boarded from outside, his flashlight the only light. Wallpaper peeled off the walls in long strips, hanging like shed skin. The floorboards creaked under every step, but held his weight. He moved into the living room and stopped. The floor was covered in photographs, not scattered, arranged, laid out in overlapping rows across every inch of the room. Dozens of them, maybe more than 100, all face up, black and white sepia faded color, different eras, different sizes, all clearly the same family. A man and a woman in what looked like the 1940s, young and serious, the way people were serious in photographs back then. Children at various ages, birthdays. A dog on a porch step, a woman hanging laundry in a backyard Ryan recognized through the boarded window as the same backyard right outside. Someone had placed these photographs here, not left them behind, placed them, one at a time. Ryan crouched and looked without touching. He photographed the room first, then individual images, telling himself this was just documentation. An estate cleaner maybe, a family member who'd started sorting through the pictures and never came back to finish. Then he noticed the pattern. The rows weren't random. They widened outward from a single photograph at the center of the room, like a spiral, and at the center face up was a photograph of a woman standing on the front porch of this exact house. She was looking directly at the camera. Ryan stood up slowly and moved back toward the hallway. He wasn't running. He didn't run. But he was moving with a purpose. He hadn't had 30 seconds earlier. He made it halfway down the hall when he heard it. A floorboard upstairs. Slow. Measured. 1 step. Then silence. Then another. Coming from the room that would sit directly above the living room. Moving toward the top of the stairs. Ryan stopped breathing. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The steps reached the landing and went quiet. He stared up into the dark. His flashlight caught the top 3 stairs and the edge of the landing. Nothing beyond that. Whatever was up there, if anything was up there, stayed back from the edge, out of reach of the light. He waited there for 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time to stand at a stranger's hallway listening for movement that never comes. Then he left. He didn't run until he was outside. The door behind him, the collapsed fence behind him, the county road under his boots. He sat in his car with the engine running for a long time before he trusted himself to drive. At home, he did something he'd never done after an explore. He went back through every photograph he'd taken inside, the arranged room, the spiral, the woman at the center. That's when he found it, in the background of one shot, a Christmas photo. The family gathered around a tree, the woman from the center picture seated to the right. A hallway was visible through a doorway behind the group, and standing in that hallway, dark and slightly out of focus, was a figure. Tall, completely still. Facing the camera, not part of the family. They were all smiling at whoever held the camera, none of them aware of what stood behind them in the dark. Ryan couldn't tell the figure's age or gender, just a shape. frozen in a moment from 60 or 70 years ago. He sent me the photograph along with the story. I've looked at it more times than I can count. The figure is there. That much isn't in question. What I can't determine, what I don't think anyone could determine, is whether it wandered into frame by accident at exactly the wrong second, or whether it had always been standing in that hallway, waiting to be found. Ryan hasn't gone back to Harlan County. He still explores abandoned buildings alone, still moves through them with the same care he always has, but now every time he steps into a new place, he does one thing he never used to do. He checks the floor first. If there are photographs down there, arranged in any kind of pattern, he turns around and leaves. I don't know who put those pictures there, he told me. I don't know why, but whatever was upstairs, it knew I was in that hallway. I could feel it at the top of those stairs just out of reach of my light. And the thing I keep coming back to is the timing. I was down there 10 minutes before I heard those footsteps. It let me find the picture in the center first. It waited for me to see her face before it moved. He went quiet for a moment. Then, that's the part that stays with me. That it had an order it wanted things to happen in. I think about that too. Not the fear of it, but the patience. Something standing at the top of a dark staircase, in no hurry at all, waiting for a stranger to find exactly the right photograph before it took a single step. Claire had spent 11 years working night shifts in a psychiatric ward. She wasn't a person who frightened easily. 11 years of night nursing had shown her things most people couldn't imagine. Not supernatural things, but human ones, which are often harder to carry. She understood institutionalized spaces. She understood the particular silence that fills a building built to contain suffering. Places that unsettled other people didn't unsettle her. That comfort, she told me, is exactly why she went in. The Hargrove Institute had operated as a private psychiatric facility in rural Tennessee from 1931 until the state shut it down in 1989, following an investigation whose records were still partially sealed. 11 acres of overgrown land, 40 minutes outside Nashville, 3 stories of pale brick, arched windows, a central clock tower stopped at 3014 and never reset. Claire had driven past it dozens of times visiting her sister. One Saturday in March, she finally stopped. She told herself it was professional curiosity, a nurse's interest in how treatment used to look. In the physical rooms where it had been administered decades ago, she wasn't going in looking for ghosts. She brought a flashlight, her phone, and the kind of practical confidence you build after a decade of managing real crises in the middle of the night. The plywood over the front entrance had already been pried loose at one corner. She didn't have to force anything. She crouched and went through. The entry hall was vast and dim, gray light leaking through cracks in the boarded windows. A reception desk stood bare against the far wall. A sign above a corridor to the left read, Ward A, in faded letters. To the right, a staircase climbed into darkness. Claire moved through the ground floor the way she moved through her own hospital on a slow night, checking each room, flashlight sweeping corner to corner, rusted equipment in a storage room, empty filing cabinets, drawers hanging open, a chapel with pews still standing in rows, a water stain on the ceiling shaped like something she chose not to look at too closely. She found Ward A at the end of the left corridor, 80 feet maybe end to end, metal bed frames in 2 rows, 12 beds total, thin mattresses rotted gray on most of them, restrained hardware still bolted to some of the frames. A nurse's station behind reinforced glass at the far end, the glass intact but too dirty to see through clearly. She stood in the doorway a moment. She was a nurse. She'd worked in newer, humane versions of this room for over a decade, and she understood, professionally, personally, what this ward had been. Then she stepped inside, and the room felt different the moment she crossed the threshold. She chose her words carefully when she described it to me, like someone who'd turned a memory over many times. Not cold exactly, though the temperature dropped, more like pressure, the feeling of walking from an empty room into one that isn't. The way a hospital corridor feels different at 3 a.m., full of sleeping patients, than it does at noon with the beds vacant. The ward felt full. She stood still and listened. Nothing. The deep textured silence of a building far from any road. Then the third bed on the left shifted. A small lateral movement. Metal leg scraping concrete. Brief and unmistakable and impossible to explain. Nothing was touching it. No draft, no vibration. It simply moved. Claire stepped back once. She wasn't panicking. She was firm about that, and I believe her. But she was retreating, slow and deliberate, the way you move when you don't want to provoke whatever you've walked into. She took a second step. That's when someone said her name. Not a shout. A normal conversational volume. The kind of voice used when someone is standing close and wants your attention. Female, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. It came from the direction of the nurse's station. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here. She hadn't spoken to a single person since leaving her car. Claire walked out of that ward at a pace she described as controlled and fast at the same time. Down the corridor, through the entry hall, through the gap in the plywood, into the gray March air. She didn't stop until she reached her car, and she sat in it for a long time before she trusted her hands on the wheel. What she told me next is the part that has stayed with me. 20 minutes later, back on the highway, her hands finally steady, a thought surfaced that she couldn't shake no matter how many times she tried to talk herself out of it. In 11 years of night nursing, she learned to recognize a specific state that patients sometimes reach in the earliest hours of the morning, a stillness that isn't sleep and isn't quite waking either. Nurses on long shifts learn to feel it without always knowing why they're checking on someone more often. I've thought about this 100 times, she told me, and I keep landing in the same place. That ward wasn't empty. I know what empty feels like, and that wasn't it. Whatever's still in there isn't wandering the hallways or trying to scare anyone. It's just there, in those beds, waiting, the way they used to wait. She paused, and when I walked in, one of them noticed me. I've driven past institutional buildings many times since Claire sent me her story, and I keep coming back to the same question. Not whether a place is abandoned, but whether it only looks that way, whether some buildings hold enough suffering for long enough that the weight of it becomes part of the walls themselves, and whether, when someone finally walks through the door after 30 years of silence, something in there still opens its eyes and still knows your name. Claire went into a building looking for history. She found something that was still living in it. Our final story tonight comes from a man named Theo, a structural engineer from Columbus, Ohio. Someone whose entire profession rests on the idea that buildings are exactly what they appear to be. Steel, concrete, load-bearing walls. Nothing more. He assessed an abandoned textile mill in rural West Virginia for a demolition company last spring. He filed his report. He still can't explain one section of it, the part about the sub-basement, the one that wasn't on any blueprint. Theo had assessed over 200 buildings in 12 years, factories, warehouses, office blocks, bridges, parking structures. He'd walked through spaces that would have terrified a layperson and evaluated them with the calm detachment of someone who understood exactly why things failed and how much time was left before they did. Load tolerances, material degradation, numbers, that was his language, and he was fluent in it. He didn't believe in things he couldn't measure. He said that clearly in his message to me up front, like it mattered that I understood it before hearing the rest. He still hasn't found a measurement that explains what he found in the sub-basement of the Caldwell textile mill. The mill had run in McDowell County, West Virginia, from 1908 until the coal economy collapsed in '87 and took it down to 4 stories of heavy brick, 12,000 square feet of floor, wooden beam ceilings reinforced with steel in later additions. 38 years empty by the time a demolition company hired Theo to assess it last April. His job was simple: walk the building, document the structure, flag hazards, recommend a sequence for tearing it down. He'd done the same job 40 times before. He started on the top floor, the way he always did, and worked his way down. The roof had failed in 2 sections on the eastern end. Water damage had eaten into some upper beams, but the core held. Whoever built this mill in 1908 had overbuilt it, meant it to outlast everyone who'd ever worked there. By early afternoon, he reached the ground floor. The basement door was heavy steel set into the north wall, the padlock already cut by the demolition crew. He went down a concrete staircase into a space that matched the blueprints exactly. Full basement, same footprint as the floor above. Low ceiling, steam pipes still running overhead. He measured, photographed, checked the foundation walls, which were solid, standard work. He was nearly finished when he found the door. It sat in the south wall, half hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit that had fused slightly into the concrete over the years. Not large, maybe 5.5 feet, steel, painted over so many times the layers had built up like cardboard. A handle, no visible lock. Theo stood in front of it and pulled out his blueprints. There was no door on the south wall. According to every set of plans he had, 1908 original, the 1943 expansion, the 1971 renovation permits. That wall was exterior foundation, solid concrete, earth on the other side. He pushed the shelving unit clear. It moved easier than it looked like it should, the way things move when a path's already been cleared before. He tried the handle. The door opened, cool air came through, not the stale damp of a sealed room. Something with motion to it, like it connected to somewhere ventilated, which made no structural sense at all, given where they were standing. He pushed it wide and shone his flashlight down a set of concrete steps. A sub-basement on no blueprint, behind a wall that should have had nothing behind it but dirt. He stood at the top of those steps for a long moment. Then he went down, because that was the job. Document what's there, plans or no plans. The sub-basement was a single room, roughly 30 feet square, 7-foot ceiling, bare concrete on every side, no pipes, no drainage, nothing that served any purpose Theo recognized from any building he'd ever worked, except one thing, scratched into the center of the floor, not painted, not drawn, gouged deep into the concrete like something sharp had worked at it repeatedly over a long stretch of time, was a circle roughly 8 feet across. Inside it, smaller markings. Shapes Theo photographed carefully and later described to me as neither letters nor numbers nor anything he could place, professionally or otherwise. He got out his tape measure and his camera and did the job properly. The way he always did, whatever the room made him feel. And the room made him feel watched, not a vague unease. Something more specific than that. Directional. Like being looked at from one fixed point in the room. He turned twice trying to find the source. Every corner was empty. His light reached all 4 walls clean. The feeling didn't move on. On his 19th minute in that room, his flashlight died. Not flickered. Off, completely, instantly, like the battery had dropped from full to zero with nothing in between. He'd changed the batteries that morning. Always did before necess. Dead lights and compromised structures were a safety habit he never skipped. 30 feet underground, in a room that shouldn't exist, in total dark. His hands found his phone by feel. The screen light came up fine. He used it across the room, up the stairs, through the door, across the basement, up the main stairs and out into the April afternoon, and he didn't stop walking until he was in his truck with the engine on. He filed his report 2 days later. Full documentation, dimensions, photographs, the absence of any structural function, the markings on the floor. He recommended the demolition company loop in the County Historical Society before touching anything, on the chance the room predated the mill itself. They thanked him, said they'd look into it. He never heard whether they did. There was one more thing, though. Something he told me he debated leaving out because he wasn't sure it meant anything. Going through his photos on his laptop that night, he noticed something he'd missed in the room itself, in 3 of the shots, taken from different angles at different points during those 19 minutes. There was a reflection in his flashlight beam on the far wall, a reflection that sat in a different spot each time, as if it had moved between photographs. He sent them to me. I've looked at all 3 closely. What's in that reflection I can't say for certain. The resolution's limited, the angle's rough, and rough concrete throws odd shapes back at a flashlight beam under the best conditions. But in the 3rd photograph taken in his final minute in that room, The reflection sits directly behind where he was standing, closer than it was in the first two. Whatever was down there with him wasn't standing still. 3 stories. Ryan, who found a room full of photographs arranged by someone or something that already knew he was coming. Claire, who walked into a ward that felt occupied and heard her name spoken in a building where no one else should have been. Theo, who went down into a room with no blueprint and came back with photographs of something that moved every time he wasn't looking. I don't have explanations for any of it. What I have are the stories and the people who lived them, ordinary people, ordinary lives, who walked into abandoned places and came out carrying something they didn't walk in with. If you've been somewhere you shouldn't have been, a place that made your body understand before your mind caught up that you weren't alone, send it to me. Links in the description. I'm Mr. Nocturn. New stories every week. Subscribe if you're ready for more. And tonight, whatever you do, stay out of the basement.